Well, welcome everyone to Michigan and Ohio Hands and Voices Lunch and Learn. My name is Janelle Frost, and I am the Executive Director for Michigan Hands and Voices. And we also have Tabby Bellhorn with us as well, and she's the Executive Director for Ohio Hands and Voices. We're so happy that you've joined us today, and we are going to have a half-an-hour discussion on extended school year. Just a little bit of background regarding this call. It is recorded, so you will be able to get that recording afterwards and share that if you need to. And if you would like to ask questions throughout, you can make comments, and then we will take those questions if needed right during the presentation, or we can hold them till after, and Tabby will be fielding those for us. So I will be running the meeting today and discussing this with you, and I have to say, thinking about extended school year makes me think about summer, so hopefully we can all be in good spirits and feel some warmth with this presentation. So what is ESY, or Extended School Year? Extended School Year services means special education and related services that are provided to a child with a disability beyond the normal school year of the public agency in accordance with the child's IEP and at no cost to the parents of the child, and it meets the standards of the state education agency. When doing research on ESY, particularly for this webinar, I found something interesting that I'd like to share with you regarding our state of Michigan. We actually have been doing ESY longer than any other state, and that's because of a court case that we had back in 1973. So the federal guidance have been taken from Michigan's production of those way back in 1973. So most states that are the states that have or that just utilize the federal guidance, that comes from what Michigan has and has put out there. So I did speak with Tabby prior regarding Ohio and their standards. They do use the federal guidance standards, so it will be similar in both states. So what I'm going to show you today, you can rest assured will be able to help you understand your state policies and standards. However, if you do move out of Michigan, Ohio, you may have to look at some of the standards that they provide. All right, so I always like to include the IDEA rule number, and this is so that you can look this up afterwards if needed. So that is rule number 300.106. And here's what it does say, that each public agency must ensure that extended school year services are available as necessary to provide FAPE, or a free and appropriate public education. So across the U.S., this needs to be provided. Extended school year services must be provided only if a child's IEP team determines on an individual basis that the service is necessary. So it is an individualized decision. And in implementing the requirements of this section, a public agency may not limit extended school year services to a particular category of disability. So it doesn't matter what disability it is or eligibility qualification, no matter what, they have to go the process in determining whether the child is eligible or not, and they cannot just apply it for specific disabilities. All right, so determination of ESY. How do you determine whether your child will need extended school year services? Well, in considering the need for these services, the IEP team must first answer this question. Is there one or more current annual goal that addresses skills which need to be maintained without interruption for the student to benefit meaningful from a free and appropriate public education? So ESY must be tied to a goal that the child has in their IEP. And thinking about that does help myself as a parent and hopefully as professionals to think of ESY when we are creating goals. That you want to start right at the very beginning, because to have it in mind of the 1 year's growth in 1 year's time and that goal, and thinking, will this child need to have services through breaks? And it kind of like opens up of not thinking about ESY just when you're determining at the end of the year if you need it or not, but throughout the entire year. Determination is based on data, and you're going to hear me talk about data throughout this presentation today because it is very important, and it's the only thing that will help to qualify your child or student. So a student with a goal area of concern may be determined to need ESY services due to 3 different things. And we're going to talk about each individually, but I'm going to state them here. So number 1, a serious potential for regression of skills beyond a reasonable period of recoupment. Number 2, the nature or severity of the disability. Or number 3, critical stages or areas of learning. So if you can start out right from the beginning, if there are no identified goal areas of concern, then ESY services are not needed for FAPE. So first you have to have the goal, and then you look at these 3 different determination factors. Notice there is 3. There's not just 1. What I have heard in several different situations is that most school districts that are claiming that they don't, or that a parent has a trouble with getting ESY, will look at just number 1, regression and recoupment. And there is 3. So we're going to look at all 3 of them today. So regression and recoupment, what is this? So we're going to look to see if there is data that indicate to the team that an identified goal of concern, that there's a serious potential for regression of the skill beyond a reasonable period of recoupment. And if you kind of look at this picture here, you see this group of children, and then you see this all, most of them are in white, and there's one in red in the back following behind. Well, every child has some type of regression and recoupment after a break. So our children have spring break right now. They come back and they may have to be reminded of something that was taught prior to the break. But most of the children, like in the white, are able to pick up and go right at it again. What we're looking at is those children that have a hard time with this recoupment period, which is to be reasonable, that they can't just recoup right away and get back going, that they need more time to do that, and we want to avoid that. So we're looking at whether that student would need ESY or services during those break periods. So an example of regression and recoupment, and this is little Johnny here up in the right-hand corner. So I'm going to give you an example of Johnny. He's behind in his receptive and expressive language skills. And the goal on his IEP was written for September 2018. And it said, Johnny will acquire 100 new vocabulary words by September 2018. So looking at his past breaks, does Johnny show regression and inability to recoup within a reasonable time so that he can acquire the skills needed to reach this goal? Now this particular goal, and I have to apologize, was written in September 2017, meeting it in 2018. But this goal in particular, you would break it down throughout the year. So you would have quarters that you would be checking in on Johnny and seeing how he's doing. So if we broke that down in 4, if we did quarters, it would be, probably 25 new vocabulary words each quarter. And so you can track that and see how he's doing. And along the year, with data, you could see whether he is, on track to meeting that goal. And you can also track during breaks, is that what he's having most of the problem with. Now, thinking about, developing this goal and thinking about ESY right from the very beginning, you're going to want to include information during those really important breaks like Christmas or midwinter break or spring break. So this is a time when parents want to be recording their own data and teachers want to be recording the data of how long it's taking for Johnny to get back on track. All right, so the second determination is nature and severity of the disability. So is there data regarding the nature or severity of the disability of the student that indicate to the IEP team that there is a need to provide services and identify goal areas of concerns during breaks in the school year? So you're really looking at, is this child able to maintain 1 year's growth in 1 year's time with the regular school year in mind, or do you see that the severity of the disability is affecting the child? So, and this does also include, looking at physical medical issues with the child too, that they would be missing more or missing school, that would determine the child would need extra times to make up this in order to reach these goals. So here's that example of Johnny again. So he's behind in his receptive and expressive language. We're going to look at this determination and see, is it because of the nature and severity of his disability that there is a need for extended school year because of that. All right, so the third determination is critical stage or areas of learning. And this is probably one that isn't always looked at. And in our cases, for children that are deaf or hard of hearing or any disability that has a language component, this particular determination would be something that we should definitely be considering. So, is there data that indicate to the IEP team that in the identified goal area of concern, the student is at a critical stage of learning or in a critical area of learning where failure to provide a service beyond the normal school year will severely limit the student's capacity to acquire essential skills? And why our students are or this area is of great concern is because children that are deaf or hard of hearing have an ability to hear what's going on, so language is affected. And we do know that language, there is a window of opportunity for learning from 0 to 7, but in particular 0 to 3. And so there is some critical periods that we want to make sure to maximize learning. So the critical area of learning must be identified, and then there are some follow-up questions that must be answered as well. So is there a skill that needs to be mastered immediately? If the student does not master the skill immediately, is the degree of mastery likely to be permanently reduced? Is the student at a critical stage of development where there is a window of opportunity that will be lost if services are not provided? And this is where I was talking about language development and maximizing that window of opportunity from 0 to 3 or 0 to 7. We want to definitely look at this when we're looking at goals for our children. Are there changes in the student's medical, physical, or sensory status that makes it possible to predict an accelerated rate of learning during the ESY period, the critical stage? And this, too, is something that we may run into with our DHH kiddos, with possibly, being implanted, getting hearing aids. Is there going to be any type of medical or physical things going on during that period that we want to make sure to maximize that time of learning? And the last one, is the skill in a critical area of learning, and will a break in service result in the loss of a window of opportunity for mastering that skill? So is that child, working on a skill, and we need them to continue right now, and as a team you can determine whether, a break is going to be cause for alarm. All right, and the biggest question of all, what data supports this? I did mention we were going to talk about data throughout this presentation, and it is the key to making sure that ESY, if you feel that your child or student needs it, then data must be there. All right, so we're going to look at the critical stage of learning on Johnny, and here is Johnny's behind in this receptive and expressive language skill. The goal was written that he will acquire 100 new vocabulary words by September 2018. So is this a skill that needs to be mastered immediately? And we're asking those critical questions that we saw in that previous slide. Is Johnny at a critical stage of development where there's a window of opportunity that will be lost if services are not provided? Is there a change in Johnny's status that indicates an accelerated period of growth? Is the skill in a critical area of learning, and will a break in the service result in the loss of window of opportunity for mastering this skill? So is he in between that, or is he at the age of 0 to 3, 0 to 7? And we need to look at that and consider those factors. So in all IEP decisions, the IEP team must base ESY decisions on data. I said that throughout there. Now I'm going to list several different forms of data we can use because I think it's important. And I know this is a long list, but I really want to go through these so that you understand what you should be collecting throughout the year. So progress monitoring data on IEP goals and objectives. And this was number one because this is really most important, that you are throughout the year monitoring your child or the student's goals and objectives correctly in order to be able to come to a decision, and hopefully that decision would be fairly easy if you do monitor correctly. Data recorded and provided by parents. This is really important because parents are going to be with the child during those break periods. And you can, provide information that the schools would not know of regarding how, the child behaves when starting or going back to school and how stressful it is. But, you must provide information throughout breaks, before breaks, throughout the break, and then afterwards in order to help collect the right forms of information. Data from another school district that the student attended. So you have this previous information that explains how the child did during breaks. That's going to be very important if they did come from a different school district or even from their elementary school moving to middle school, that you have that information provided. Reports from outside agencies and professionals, very important that you have that as well. Interviews with present and past teachers or service providers, the parents and the student. And I did put those in bold, the parents and the student. This is really important that that the parents and the student themselves are questioned and that they provide information. They are definitely the ones that are feeling this the most during those breaks and understanding, what is working and what is not. Medical records indicating that the student has experienced significant trauma, making the need for service immediately. Vocational or pre-vocational assessments. Assessments can be very handy in making sure to provide the data needed to determine these objectives and goals. Medical records that indicate an immediate need for services that cannot wait until after a break. So there may be, some type of surgery that's coming up, or possibly, looking at a progressive type of disability, and having those medical records to make sure to present that to the team, so that the importance of getting those services during ESY if needed. Data that indicate a loss of access to on-the-job training will potentially result in significant delays in mastering critical pre-vocational or vocational skills. So this is one that I'm working on now, having a 16-year-old son, and thinking about his on-the-job training and what he needs. And as long as those are associated with a goal that we have, maybe a transitional goal, we want to make sure that we're assessing and thinking about those things as well. Professional peer-reviewed literature in the goal areas of concern that provide research substantiating a critical stage in learning, and that this learning must occur without delay. Now, that particular piece of data I have found to be very important when looking at language development in that critical window period. So, and there is a lot of peer review literature on that, and it will be important to have data to back up your concern regarding the critical stages of learning. Developmental standards within the goal areas of concern that indicate that the student is at a critical stage of learning. So again, more data with developmental standards. So timeline for ESY, well, there really is no timeline for IEP team's consideration of ESY, except that it does state that public agencies are expected to ensure that these determinations are made in a timely manner. And it does go on to state that so that services can be provided for that child. So you really are going to have to think about ESY as an ongoing process, and that you're going to be discussing this at every IEP meeting and continually get that into, this is just the practice that we have to do in order that, should we need it, we have everything prepared in order to implement it. And then hopefully the timeline will not need to be a factor. However, I can state that, we are in the period right now in April where if ESY is in question, that all students or parents and professionals should make sure to get in a IEP meeting in order to discuss that if there's any concerns. You don't want to wait too late, and then it'd be difficult for the school to be able to set up those services. So, when to consider ESY for your child or student? All year round. I've got that 24/7, 365 days. I think even with myself presenting this presentation, I've kind of taken a step back to think how I personally have kind of neglected thinking about this, in the fall when I, needed to look at the goals and how we are writing the objectives and making sure that we're including data collection through those break periods, if there has been a concern before, and really to just make sure to monitor it properly so that when you get to that place in the year that you can determine that fairly easily. So here's a recap. First, you want to make sure that there was a goal within the IEP of concern. You're going to look at regression and recruitment, the nature or severity of the disability, and then the critical stage of learning. All right, so some takeaways. The need for ESY services is an individual decision based on many different sources of information that must be reviewed every year from a fresh perspective. So ESY needs to be discussed at every IEP, whether in just a short statement about talking about, do we need to discuss ESY now? As parents, I would definitely bring it up and at least kind of have a short discussion of right now in this period of time, what should we be thinking about? How is the child doing, and is there any concerns right now, even if it is in the fall or in the winter, whatever time of year, so that you are making goals that are appropriate in order for that not to be an issue later on. ESY services need to be discussed at every IEP and other team meetings as appropriate. The purpose of ESY services is to address skills which need to be maintained without interruption for the student to benefit meaningful from a free and appropriate public education. It is not the purpose of ESY services to work on new goals or objectives. I think that is key as well. It is not the time to bring up an issue, or you have to have had a goal that it has to be tied to. So if there now is a new concern, unfortunately, you can't just say, we're going to do it during ESY and that work out. It has to be a part of the IEP already. All right, a student with one or more goal area of concern may need ESY services for a variety of reasons, not just regression and recruitment. Remember, it's the nature of severity and the critical learning stages. ESY services can be provided in many different ways, including using community resources as part of an individual ESY plan. And ESY services are not limited to the summer months, especially in programs that spread school days across the calendar year. So I know there are more school districts that are going to a year-long school program, and so we want to make sure that you are aware of that, and that during those week breaks, ESY is also an option. With that, I'm going to open it up to Tabby or any questions that we have. I think we just have a couple minutes. Oh, 1 minute. I'm sorry, everyone. There was a lot to share. Is there any questions, Tabby? Are you there?
Hi, Janelle. This is Tabby. Thank you very much. I have gone ahead and everybody is unmuted now. If you do have questions, there were no questions that came through via chat while you were presenting, Janelle. So we're happy to open the floor for any questions. We do have some. Thank you for the presentation. Yes, thank you. You covered a lot of information for us today, Janelle, in a short time period.
I know. I'm sorry if it felt like I was rambling. There was a lot of good information. I didn't want to miss anything.
I think the only thing that I want to add, just for any parents that might be struggling to get extended school year services, we do have our next Tales from the Trenches, which is parents sharing their story of getting extended school year services for their child, and that is going to be on Sunday evening, May 6th at 7 p.m. So if you have not received information to register for that yet, please feel free, or I should say keep an eye out for that. But we would love to have you join us for that. It's kind of a continuation of this Lunch and Learn and hearing, like I said, from parents who have had some trouble and how they overcame those objections for extended school year.
Thank you, Tabby. And I think this is Janelle. I would also like to add that from Michigan and Ohio Hands and Voices, Tabby and myself are the ASTRA coordinators, which is Advocacy and Support Training Program, and we do have advocates that can help with parents should you feel you need a little bit more help and assistance, and we can help not just in the IEP meeting, but we help prior to look over information. So if you have questions regarding ESY, you can contact us, and we can help, maybe get an advocate to work with you one-on-one if needed. And our contact information is up on the screen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Janelle. I'm going to go ahead and end the session, stop recording. It seems like we don't have any questions. But if you do think of something afterwards, please feel free to contact Janelle and I.